I'm Kathy with a C.
And I'm Kathy with a K.
And this is Killer Destinations. All right, we're going to go back to something very basic. We're going to ask you to download our episodes. And it's because we thought we wouldn't need to. People are going to go to YouTube. But what we realized was, after a number of people reached out to us, that YouTube really isn't where people want to hear us. They want to listen to us in their car, driving wherever they're going to drive. So we need you to download our episodes. And Kathy is going to give you a brief rundown on how to do that on your iPhone.
Okay, friends, if you're on iPhone and you go to Apple Podcasts, and you can search that if you don't see where it is automatically, open up the podcast app. On the very bottom to the right is a magnifying glass. Tap that, type in Killer Destinations Podcast, and you will go to our show. At the very top, mine has a check mark and then 3 dots. If you click on the 3 dots and go to settings. Once you click on the settings, scroll down just a little bit and you'll see the heading downloads, and there are 2 items: automatically download and remove played downloads. The first one you want to take care of is remove played downloads. If it says off, turn it on, because this way, once you finish listening to an episode, it's automatically deleted. Then you want to go back and click on automatically download and scroll all the way to the bottom, which actually isn't that far. And you want to click on all new episodes.
And this is best for us because that way, anything you haven't listened to is going to populate onto your phone. But again, once you listen to it, it'll be automatically deleted.
So bing, bang, bong, no worries. You knew there was a bing, bang, bong in there somewhere. So toddle on off.
Exactly. But anyway, so we will do the Android version of this another moment because I have
Next
an Android.
week. Yes, she does.
All right.
And we'll do a Spotify one as well. But like Kathy said, it's disheartening how few downloads we've increased since we started telling people not to worry about it, because of course we had hoped the move to YouTube would take off some of the slack by using that platform instead.
Right. And we realize we hate doing videos anyway.
I know, we really do. And nobody wants to see that.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Exactly. So if you guys will do it, again, it's not even a download, listen, delete anymore. It's go fix the settings on whichever podcast you listen to it on and make it automatically
never think about
remove.
it again. Never think about it again.
Exactly.
All right.
Thank you. Now we'll stop talking and we will get to the episode. Well, I mean, we won't stop talking, but we'll stop talking about downloads until next time.
Exactly. And we better see a bump.
A violent attack against one family, wiping out generations in just one night. Only those too young to be witnesses were allowed to survive. But no one had any idea who was really behind the massacre.
Today's destination is Pike County, Ohio. Pike County is located in the Appalachian region of southern Ohio and was founded in 1815. It was named after American explorer Zebulon Montgomery Pike, who is credited with discovering the majestic Pikes Peak in Colorado 9 years prior.
Kathy, did you know Pikes Peak was the inspiration for America the Beautiful?
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
No, I had no idea. Did you find that out when you were researching
Yeah.
this? Oh, aren't you the one?
I'm so smart.
Established in Ohio's Appalachian country, highlights include historic sites and a rural, close-knit community with scenic, low-traffic areas. And when we say a close-knit community, we mean very loyal, very tight-lipped, and a family-first attitude. Today, the county is considered a challenging place to live due to high poverty rates and bears a distressed economic designation by the Appalachian Regional Commission. Pike County does not have a high murder rate, but in 2016, the murder rate skyrocketed when one family was targeted by a killer with a nefarious plan.
So it's April of 2016, and on a crisp Saturday morning, just before 8 a.m., a frantic woman called 911. When the Pike County Sheriff's Office dispatcher answered, this frantic woman told her, "I'm on my sister and brother-in-law's property. We're out here on Union Hill Road, and it's about 20 miles from the center of town. And I just walked into one of the trailers on the property, and my brother-in-law is dead. So, Kathy, the woman's name was Bobby Jo Manley, and she and her brother-in-law were super close. And so every morning she actually would go out there and help him feed his animals. And so this day was no different. So she gets there, and so she goes to the front door to open it and go in and talk to him. And the first thing she sees that's odd is that his dogs are on the front porch. His dogs were always in the house with him. And so she's like, okay, that's kind of weird. But she tries the front doorknob to go in, and it's locked. And it's never locked. But she happens to know where they have a hide key, so she went and got it, let herself into the front door, and she's in the living room. And the first thing she saw was blood in the room, and then what looked like drag marks from the front room back toward where the bedroom was. She yelled her brother-in-law's name as she ran toward the bedroom, but Kath, as soon as she got to the bedroom door, she stopped. Through the door, she could see her brother-in-law on his bed. He had had the stuffing beaten out of him, which is the nicest way I can say what she found, and she knew he was dead. And so, of course, this is what she's telling the dispatch. And the dispatcher said, can I get their names? And she said, yes, my brother-in-law is Christopher Roden Sr., and by the way, in his bedroom too is his cousin, Gary Roden. I didn't go that far into the bedroom, but he looks like he's dead too. The dispatcher says, we're going to send deputies over immediately. But like we said, it's about 20 miles from town. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get out there. Okay. So now Bobby Jo needs to wait for the police to get there. But let me explain the Roden property. Christopher Roden Sr. had about 30 acres of land. And on that land were several trailers where members of the family lived. Some of the buildings are close to each other, kind of like next door neighbors type thing. And then others are a couple hundred yards away, a little bit off to themselves, but still within this family perimeter. So of the family members who were there, Chris Sr. lived in one of the trailers, as we said, and Chris Sr. had been married to Bobby Jo's sister, Dana. Both of them, Kath, were late 30s, but they were divorced. So while Chris Sr. lived in a trailer on the property, his ex-wife Dana lived on the property as well, a couple hundred yards away, in a trailer with 2 of their 3 children. Now, next to Chris's trailer was another trailer, and in that one lived one of Chris's sons and his girlfriend and their children. So, of course, while Bobby Jo's waiting for the police to come, she runs next door to tell Frankie, Chris Sr.'s son, that his dad was dead. Bobby Jo hightails it off. She goes to the door to open it, and it's locked too. So she starts banging on the door, calling for either Frankie or her 3-year-old nephew, saying, open the door for Auntie Jo, open the door for Auntie Jo. And it was the 3-year-old, Frankie's son, who answered the door. Bobby Jo asked the little boy, where's your daddy? And he pointed at the bedroom. So she goes to the bedroom and finds Frankie and his fiancée, Hannah Gilly, in the bedroom, dead. Between them, Kathy, was a 6-month-old boy. Thankfully, like the 3-year-old, this child had not been physically harmed. So Bobby Jo grabs the baby, who is covered in his parents' blood. She takes the 3-year-old and they leave as fast as they can, and they go sit in her car and wait for the police to get there.
While the deputies are at the property processing the scene, which was a horrific crime scene in these 2 trailers, another 911 call comes into the Pike County Sheriff's. And this one is from Bobby Jo's brother. So Bobby Jo made the first 911 call. Her brother James is now making a second one. So Bobby Jo had told her brother James that there were murders on the property. So he knew of the horrific killings that had occurred, but he couldn't get a hold of their sister Dana. So this is Chris Sr.'s ex-wife, who lived a couple hundred yards away in a different trailer. She wasn't answering her phone. She wasn't returning any text messages. So he freaks out and he goes to the property himself. He goes up to her trailer and his worst fears were realized. Dana, too, had been murdered in her trailer. She was shot to death alongside her and Chris Sr.'s daughter, Hannah. And their son, Chris Jr., had also been shot to death. Chris Jr. was only 16. And Hannah was found in bed with her 4-day-old daughter lying next to her. And like the other young children, the infant had been spared. Fortunately, Hannah's other daughter, who was 2 years old, was not on the property that day. She had been spending the night at her father's house, which was miles away. And Kath, there was one person who hadn't been accounted for, and it would be almost 5 hours before the body of the 8th victim was found. And that was Chris Sr.'s brother, Kenneth Roden. And he was found in his trailer down the road a piece from the first 3 crime scenes. And just like the others, he too was shot to death. So right now, the Roden family members killed in this horrific massacre included Christopher Sr., he was 40 years old, his ex-wife Dana, who was 37, their children, Frankie, who was 20, Hannah, who was 19, and Christopher Jr., who was 16, and then Frankie's fiancée, Hannah Gilley, who was 20 years old, Kenneth Roden, who was Chris Sr.'s brother, and he was 44, and Gary Roden, Chris Sr.'s cousin, who had been spending the night that night, and he was 38 years old. The 4 children that survived were a 3-year-old boy, a 2-year-old girl who was visiting her dad that night, a 6-month-old boy, and a 4-day-old girl, all too young to be witnesses to the murders. So at the time of the murders, then Ohio Attorney General, now Governor, Mike DeWine, said that the murders were a pre-planned, premeditated execution, and he believed there was more than one shooter. He said it was a sophisticated operation, and the suspect or suspects took several steps to cover up their tracks and remove any possible evidence that would help police track them down. And naturally, the residents of this small rural county who knew each other very well were terrified. Why this family? Who could have committed such horrific murders? And who would be next?
So, in the wake of all of this, hundreds of tips came in. And the detectives in the sheriff's office were busy tracking people down, interviewing people, trying to find any evidence they could to find out who had killed this family. Essentially, they had eliminated 2 generations of a family in one fell swoop. And Kathy, what I thought was interesting, and you can really only do this in a small rural town, the Pike County Sheriff actually was at a press conference with the Attorney General and said, okay, all you Roden family members out there, you just heard what the AG said. This was targeted. All of you, start carrying weapons if you aren't already. Make sure you're armed because, again, rural town, like you can't do this in LA.
No, in Los Angeles, they'd be like, okay, everybody, manifest a good outcome.
I'll take the rural county.
Exactly. Give me the gun, thank you.
Exactly. But not only did he say this to the Roden family, he also said, and anybody else who feels unsafe, arm yourself as well. Because they were 20 minutes away from the sheriff. And I remember we were talking to a friend of ours who we call the chief, and we've mentioned her before in other episodes. She had said that in Orange County, I don't know LA County, but in Orange County, it takes on average 6 minutes for a police officer to get to you once you call 911. So you need to be able to fend off somebody or hide from somebody or do something. But 6 minutes sounds like a really long time if you're scared and you don't know what's going on.
Oh, if you're under attack, 6 minutes is an eternity.
But could you imagine 20?
No.
Yeah, not at all. So I just, as I was listening to this, though, I'm like, rural county.
Exactly.
But Kath, just a few days after their murders, they got their first big clue. As they were searching the crime scenes on the Roden acreage, at 3 of the 4 locations where the victims were found, they found huge marijuana grow operations. I mean, it was so extensive that there were hundreds and hundreds of plants that were recovered by the police. Now, given the precise nature of the killers, experts actually were opining that, this actually has the mark of a professional hit. And so, of course, the police were thinking, who else would be motivated to kill the owners of a massive marijuana operation?
Dude, I saw Ozark. I know how this goes.
And that was a B on a TS, right?
It was drugs, cartel. I get it. Beautiful natural surroundings. Same thing.
Exactly. But despite this new avenue for the detectives to investigate, an entire year went by without anyone being arrested for the Roden family murders. So in May of 2017, like we said, just a year later, a SWAT team from Franklin County Sheriff's Office raided a Pike County home that was approximately 10 miles from where the 8 members of the Roden family were killed. Police actually said, we're searching for suspects in the murders. And then for whatever reason, they backpedaled quickly and were like, no, actually, we're just looking for evidence, not suspects.
We're just checking things out.
Exactly.
With search warrants. Yeah. It means nothing. Don't mind us.
Exactly. No, we don't suspect you. You're good.
Right.
But they also then searched a property in nearby Adams County. And the property they searched in Adams County was actually once owned and had recently been sold by 23-year-old Jake Wagner. Now, he was an ex-boyfriend of victim Hannah Roden and the father of her 2-year-old daughter. And so the 2-year-old was with Jake the night of the massacre.
And Hannah was Chris Sr.'s daughter who had been shot to death laying next to her 4-day-old daughter.
Correct, but Jake was not the father of the 4-day-old.
Just the father of the 2-year-old.
Correct.
Okay.
Everybody keeping up with this?
Barely.
I know.
I'm barely keeping up.
We'll draw family trees for everybody
it's
for our Instagram.
It's like when you have to have like some sort of like spreadsheet or Venn diagram or what.
Exactly.
Actually, Venn diagram.
Not a Venn diagram.
But...
Well, it could be like all the Roden family members that overlap in this one thing.
Exactly.
We could do it. A month after police searched Jake's property, the Attorney General's office announced that they were seeking additional information not only on Jake Wagner, but also his parents Billy and Angela and his older brother George. But investigators did not specify their involvement in the case.
They're like, we searched the property. They're not suspects, but tell us everything you know about all 4 of them.
Exactly. And don't leave anything out.
Right.
And basically that's what they did. The AG's office were like, look, we're interested just in receiving information about, like any interactions, any conversations, any dealings, transactions, like drug or otherwise. Did you have sex with any of them?
Right.
I'm totally
just let us
guessing,
know.
But yeah. And so they're like, it could be personal or business, whatever you want. But you know what? None of them are suspects or even persons of interest in these murders. Right. So I'm not sure if the
but
county
here's a
believed
tip line.
it. Yeah, exactly. And there's a reward. But Kath, it turned out that just a few months after the murders, the Wagner family moved from Pike County to Alaska. And at the time, Jake told his friends that they were moving because his little 2-year-old daughter, who thankfully had not been with her mother Hannah when everybody was killed, he's like, I don't know what's going on, but I want to make sure my daughter's safe. So we're going to toddle on off to Alaska. He might have dipped. I'm not sure if it's toddling or dipping.
Right.
We'll have to clarify that later. But about 2 months before the AG made this request for additional information that we just talked about, the Wagners actually moved back to a neighboring county. And so there were people who were like, oh, they ran away. Like they moved to Alaska so they couldn't get arrested. They came back.
They're like, Alaska's really cold.
I know, it's far.
So in November of 2018, and this is 2.5 years after the murders, there was a major break in the case. And the Pike County Sheriff announced that 6 suspects in the Roden murders had been arrested. Attorney General DeWine said they believed the evidence would show that these suspects planned the murders for months. They studied each of the victims' habits and their routines. They knew the layout of their homes. They knew where each one slept. And then after executing each victim, detectives believed that the killers tampered with the victims' phones and surveillance cameras on their property. All 6 individuals who were arrested were members of Jake Wagner's family. So him and his brother George, and both of them were in their 20s, their parents, Billy and Angela, who were in their 40s, and both of Jake's grandmothers. So the 2 grandmothers, Kath, weren't charged with murder.
Kathy, I do think they're like either called Mima or Mama.
Yeah, they're mamas.
Are they? They're not Mimas?
Well, they could be mamas.
Okay. How about if we call one Mima and one Mama?
Anyway, the grandmas, the mimas and the mamas weren't charged with murder, but everybody else was, okay? So this included 8 counts of murder plus multiple other counts like conspiracy, tampering with evidence, etc., for each of the 4. There were 22 charges in all, and everybody pled not guilty. The grandmas, on the other hand, were charged with lesser crimes. One of the grandmas, we'll call her Mima, was charged with obstruction of justice and perjury, and the perjury charge came from her testimony at a grand jury hearing. However, Mima's perjury and obstruction of justice charges were soon dropped.
So, Kath, what happened, though, is Mima was accused of buying bulletproof vests for the family members who did the shooting, and she was actually able to prove that she had bought them 2 weeks after the murders because she had said, of course, they didn't know who the shooters were. They're all in fear for their lives, and she wanted to make sure that her children were protected.
Ah, okay. So she actually didn't buy bulletproof vests in advance of the murders.
Correct.
So Mima got off.
Yes.
They just dropped her charges.
Correct.
All right. Now, the second grandma, Mama, was a notary, and it was her dastardly deeds that broke the case open. So here's what happened. Jake's dad, Billy, and Hannah's dad, Chris Sr., were best friends. They had been buddies for years and years and years. So their children, Jake and Hannah, got together, they did the dirty, and they had a baby, okay? Hannah lived on her father's property in this trailer with her mother and her newborn. But it was Hannah's 2-year-old that she shared with Jake, as we had said earlier. However, Hannah kept primary custody. I mean, this kid was pretty much 100% of the time with Hannah. So like a very, very tiny percentage of the time, Jake was involved in his 2-year-old daughter's life. So what happened during the course of the investigation was that detectives realized that 19 days before these horrific murders, there was a custody agreement filed in court, which gave Jake full custody of this 2-year-old girl. So when detectives found that, they're like, this is kind of weird. I mean, yeah, Hannah just had a baby. You know, she had a 4-day-old with her at the time of her murder. Did she want Jake to share more time with her 2-year-old? You know, but gosh, full custody. This is suspicious. This is kind of strange, okay? So what they did is they went to extended family members of the Roden clan, and they said, can anybody identify this signature? Is this signature Hannah's? The family members were like, no, that's not hers. So detectives were like, okay, we thought it was kind of odd that she would just want to give custody to Jake. Then they looked at the notary. And who was the notary? It was Jake's mama. Little grandma had forged these documents in court for Jake to get custody just 19 days before the murder. So at this point, investigators realized that the murders were likely all about the custody of this 2-year-old. And a lot of people didn't believe that could possibly be true.
Killing 8 people for custody?
Exactly. But it was the only piece of the puzzle that let everything else fall into place.
It would be another year before anything new happened in this case. And Kath, in December of 2019, so this is now more than a year after the Wagners were arrested, news broke that the notary grandma, Mama, took a plea deal in the case, and she actually pleaded guilty to a reduced misdemeanor charge of obstructing official business. And in court, she said she just didn't feel like it was a good Christian thing to lie, and she just couldn't live with it anymore. But she also confirmed what investigators suspected. Hannah Roden had not signed her name on the custody documents. And with this plea deal, the other 5 felony charges against Mama were dismissed. But in what seems to be a glacial pace of this case anyway, it would take another 17 months before the case had its next major breakthrough. On April 22nd, 2021, this is the 5-year anniversary of the massacre of the 8 Roden family members. And Jake Wagner had a status hearing in the case. But Jake showed up to court, and rather than a status hearing, a bombshell was dropped. The prosecution announced that Jake, remember, he's the youngest Wagner son and the father of Hannah Roden's 2-year-old, had made a plea deal. He would plead guilty to 8 counts of aggravated murder. And in exchange for this plea deal, the prosecutors would drop the possibility of the death sentence, essentially sparing the now 28-year-old his life. But as part of this deal, Kathy, the rest of his family also would not face the death penalty. And shockingly, as part of this plea deal, he agreed to testify against his mother, father, and brother as to what their roles were in this massacre. And Kath, part of the reason this was so surprising is what you had mentioned. Not only is it a very tight-knit community, but the Wagners themselves were known as being very clannish, an island unto themselves.
Blood was everything.
Exactly. And you did not rat anybody out if they were your family. I mean, basically, they were so loyal to each other that they would threaten any outsider who tried to penetrate this circle. At this status hearing turned plea hearing, Jake Wagner admitted that he killed 5 members of the Roden family and shot, but didn't kill a 6th member. The 6th member who he didn't kill was actually the first shot he fired that night. So when Jake shot the guy, it didn't kill him, so his father came behind him and finished him off. The victim was Chris Sr., and Jake testified that as his dad killed Chris Sr., his father yelled out, "I just shot my best friend."
That is unbelievable.
I can't imagine a life that I ever have where I do that.
And it's like, I am going to put my child's desire to have his daughter in his life above all else, including killing my best friend.
Including killing anyone, but I mean, let alone your best friend. They've been best friends for decades.
Yeah. And this assumes that Jake is telling the truth.
True. Now, after this bombshell, Special Prosecutor Angela Canepa again stunned the courtroom when she actually said, you know what? Jake's actually been helping us all along. And because of him, we were able to recover the guns used the night of the massacre. Because up to this point, they had no weapons.
They'd searched the property and they found no weapons.
Exactly. And searched the Wagner house and found nothing. But Kathy, it turned out after the murders, what Jake told the prosecution is that the Wagner family placed the guns in buckets that they filled with concrete. Then they took these 4 buckets and gave them to a family member for Father's Day and said, "Here are your boat anchors.
You've always wanted boat anchors. Here you go."
Exactly. And then when they got to the middle of a pond that was near their house, they cut the ropes and they sunk to the bottom. So Jake said, "Here's where you're going to find them." And sure enough, detectives got a search warrant, got these buckets out of the pond, and when they chipped away, sure enough, they were able to verify that these were the guns used to fire the bullets that killed the members of the Roden family. So basically, Kathy, what they did is, in exchange for this, Jake was going to have to testify against his mother, father, and brother. But rather than the death penalty, what the agreed upon sentence was, Jake would be given 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and an additional 160 years for all of the other felonies that came along with this horrible night. Now, again, this is an agreed upon sentence because he still has to testify. So this isn't written in stone yet. He's got to do his work.
So 5 months after Jake's plea deal, his mother, Angela, also accepted a plea deal. Now, her deal was based on the confession that she didn't kill any members of the Roden family herself, but she was actually at her house on the night the murders happened. She had to be at the house to babysit Jake's 2-year-old daughter who was spending the night that night. And she also agreed to testify against the other 2 family members, her husband and her son, George. All of this is so horrific.
It is.
All of it. Anyway, the sentence that she agreed to in exchange for the plea deal was a 30-year prison term. And here's the deal. These sentences for Jake and Angela, despite the fact that they were agreed upon, were not going to be pronounced by the judge until the brother George and the dad Billy actually went to trial, because the prosecution needed to make sure that Jake and Angela would actually testify against their loved ones. 1 year after Jake and his mom struck plea deals with the prosecution, brother George was the first to go to trial. Now, this is November of 2022, 6.5 years after the murders took place. And so George had pleaded not guilty to the murder charges and basically said, look, I didn't shoot anybody. I was there on the property and I was present when the rodents were murdered, but I didn't shoot anybody. But the prosecutor was like, yeah, you know what? We don't care that you didn't shoot anybody. You took part in the planning and the carrying out and the covering up of what she called one of the most heinous crimes in Ohio history. So it turns out George was, in fact, present with his brother Jake and his dad when all the rodent family members were murdered. And what he did, although he didn't shoot anybody, he went inside with both of them when the crimes were being committed, and then he helped his brother move 2 of the bodies. So he was part and parcel of all of this. And so George's defense attorney, a guy named Richard Nash, said George is not like the rest of his family and had nothing to do with the killings. He said, quote, there are certain things in this life that we can't control. One of them is your family name. George cannot help that he's a Wagner. That does not make him a murderer, end quote. After more than 2.5 weeks of testimony, it took a jury fewer than 8 hours to reach a verdict. And of course, George was guilty on all counts. And because both brother Jake and mom Angela testified against George, according to their, plea deal agreement, the death penalty remained off the table and George was sentenced to LWOP.
And so, Kathy, in June of 2025, so we're talking like 7 months ago, Jake, his mom, Angela, and notary grandma, otherwise known as Mama, were given their formal sentences. This is now more than 9 years after the 8 rodent family members were killed. Mama was given 5 years probation. Mom Angela was given the expected 30 years. This was the term that she had agreed to because the judge said to her, Kathy, you are the one person who could have stopped this whole thing. You're in your home alone. The other men are off. You could have called the police and said this was going down and stopped it. But you never saw the moral need to stop it. And that is why you're going to prison for 30 years. And of course, now Jake is up next. He's expected his sentence to be the term agreed upon, like his mom was given. But this is now a new judge. The original judge that they did the agreement with had retired back in 2022. No idea this was going to go on another 3 years. And so the new judge said, look, I know you had an agreement with the former judge. It was going to be 8 consecutive life terms plus 160 years for the other felonies you committed. But that's not a binding agreement. So I'm not going to agree to what the prosecution recommended.
And to what Jake agreed.
Correct. So rather than being given LWOP plus 160 years, the judge sentenced him to 32 years to life. This means after time served, Kath, he'll be eligible for parole in 26 years. And the judge said the reason he did this for Jake is that he was the only one to acknowledge responsibility for the crime. And he said, look, you acknowledged it. You've accepted it. His time in prison up to that point, he had been a model prisoner. He had become incredibly religious. And the judge said, 32 years from now, you'll get your chance because you cooperated and told the truth. So the only one remaining standing is Jake's dad, Billy, and his road to trial has been a whole other story. He's been in jail since he was indicted in November of 2018. And this man who is alleged to have killed his best friend pleaded not guilty to all 22 charges. But as of today, February 17th, 2026, he has yet to go to trial. Now, in a report on Cincinnati news station Fox 19, this was about a month ago, it still remains unclear when and where the trial will be held because Billy's trial has faced multiple delays, mostly because the original judge retired, as we said, and this new judge has taken over the case. And he and Special Prosecutor Canepa apparently do not get along at all. I probably shouldn't be laughing, but it's a little amusing. The judge dismissed Billy Wagner's death penalty specifications because he said, you know what? There's already been a lot of delays. There's going to be litigation. Let's just get on with the trial. We don't want a death penalty case. And the special prosecutor was like, And the victim's family was like, And the judge was like, I'm totally paraphrasing.
These are direct quotes from the court transcript. Somebody was like, nuh-uh.
So prosecutor Canepa actually, Kath, she went over his head to the appeals court and she alleged judicial malfeasance. How often does that happen? I mean, not you, but like how often do other people do it?
It's only happened to me a handful of times, but no, it's not often.
The higher court actually was like, you know what, Judge? You abused your discretion. You had no sound reasoning process, that was in quotes, that supported your decision. So we're going to actually disagree with you.
Right. So you try to pull the death penalty off the table and we are putting it firmly back on the table.
Correct. But then the prosecutor also appealed another of the judge's rulings, which was controversial because the defense wanted to change a venue. Not only has this been splashed all over Pike County newspapers and gossip for years and years and years, but George had just been convicted in 2022. And so you have all these people in Pike County. How do you get a jury that's going to be...
So did the judge order a change of venue and
Yes.
the prosecutor appealed that?
Correct.
I bet she'll lose.
Well, it hasn't been decided yet.
Okay.
So I bet you're right. But they didn't want to do it because it's more money and it'll take more time. And because it actually takes away her homegrown audience.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Now, at this point, without having answers to the venue or anything else, it's expected that the earliest that Billy Wagner's trial will take place is in October of this year, 2026. Meaning the Roden family will have to wait more than 10 and a half years for this legal process to finally come to an end.
Thanks for listening, guys. And now I'm going to give you an update on my brother. And I'm going to try not to cry because this is, well, now here I go. I'm going to, hold on.
And let me just tell you something. My whole life until like 10 years ago, Kathy never cried.
I know.
And now she doesn't stop.
I know. Seriously, I cry at the drop of a hat. You know, and it's weird because I'm here with Kathy and we're laughing and we're doing our thing. But again, it's like a respite from the crap. Anyway, so my brother, he is in his 5th week of hospitalization.
ICU hospitalization.
Correct. And he had his leg amputated because when the oxygen was cut off to the lower portion of his body, you know, his leg just could not survive. And doctors are talking about the possibility of amputating his other leg. But the beautiful thing is that he's able to, like, he's lucid now, fully expressing opinions on things. And so he will be part of that decision, whatever it may be. So let's see. We are recording this on Saturday, late Saturday. It might be Sunday now.
It's actually Sunday.
Sunday now. And he just was able to start speaking with a trach tube in on Thursday. So I'm at work on Thursday, getting ready for a deposition. And my brother, my older brother, who I work for his firm, and he comes in and he goes, "Did you see your text message?" And I was like, "What?"
Kathy never sees them.
I know. I'm like,
he knew to ask.
Yeah. And so he goes, "Look at it." And there was a video of my younger brother, Matt, sending a message to my sister, my brother, and I, and he was speaking in the video. And so I don't know what you have to do with the trach, like you cap it or something so somebody could speak. All I know is that he's talking now. So that is a total blessing.
It's a miracle. It is an absolute miracle that he's speaking. But what was so amazing to me is that his personality was still there.
His sense of humor is still there.
Yes. And it was wonderful to see.
And he got to go outside yesterday. They brought his dog to him. And so he got to see his dog outside for a bit. So, you know, God, he's made so much progress. It's unbelievable. The fact that he's lucid and, you know,
himself.
Yes. You know, that's a miracle. But he's, you know, he still has a hole in his duodenum. And, you know, we don't know what's going to happen with that. They can't perform surgery on it. They tried to patch it. The patch didn't work. There's all sorts of machinations happening. But the point is, like, he has defied all odds up to this point, but it has been a very difficult road. You know, but again, there's like sprinklings of blessings in there. And as odd as that sounds, it just, suffering fully and totally clarifies our weaknesses, our strengths, but it also completely eliminates the noise of our lives that we think are important. You know what I mean? There's so many things that we do and engage like that just aren't important.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it really just clarifies like, you know, just the most purposeful aspects of life. Anyway, so people are reaching out and I appreciate that. It's very, very kind. And so again, prayers of healing and acceptance are greatly appreciated. And prayers are like diamonds. They're like diamonds in heaven. So the more the merrier.